Hello everybody, my name is Councillor Liz Clements. I'm chairing today's meeting of Birmingham City Council's Sustainability and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and welcome to everyone who's attending our November meeting, which is a virtual meeting via Microsoft Teams. Very pleased to have you with us. We've got quite a busy agenda. My first duty is to advise you that this meeting is being recorded and is also being webcast for live and subsequent broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. And if any members of the press or public are attending or watching, they can record and take photographs, except when there are confidential items. We don't have any such items today. I'd like, first of all, to welcome Councillor Mike Leddy, who's joined the committee, replacing Councillor Mick Brown, who's gone off to chair the Health and Social Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So very delighted to have Mike Leddy with us. Welcome, Mike. I know we'll benefit from your expertise on this committee and all your contributions. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Chair.
As this is an online informal meeting, we haven't got action notes. That's summarising that correctly? Is that right, Basima?
Yeah, that's correct, because we're not in a formal meeting today.
You're still a bit faint, Basima, but you are confirming that we can't sign off the action notes because we're not meeting in person formally. So we'll do that our next meeting in person. But I just wanted to say that I'm aware that in response to the questions that Councillor Huxtable put again about hedgerows in the city, that you've had a response from the trees officer and from the cabinet member on that issue. So I hope that's been helpful, Tim.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so we are trying to follow up requests for information that are coming from members. Okay, then. I think we do, though, as even though it's an informal meeting, need to take any declarations of interest for this meeting. So I need to register an interest myself, a pecuniary interest, because I am previously worked for the City Council, so I am still a member of the West Midlands Local Government Pension Fund, and I will be, get some sort of residual pension when I reach pensionable age. So just need to put that on record.
Chair?
Yes.
Well, I was a member of the pension fund when I was a councillor and it was open to councillors, so I suppose technically I would have to declare that. Yes, indeed, yes. Until that right was removed from councillors, yes. But if you've still got residual entitlements, yes, I think it would be the same as applies to me. Councillor Quinnan and Councillor Leddy.
Thank you, Chair. Could I also declare an interest, as I was a member of the pension fund and I'm actually receiving it? Thank you.
Thanks, Hendrina. And
Chair, my wife is a pensioner of the pension fund.
Thanks, Councillor Leddy. Yeah, that's duly noted.
Same as me as well, Chair. In the early days, I got the council pension.
Okay, can we note that also for Councillor Freeman? So thanks for registering that, Eddie. Yeah, so that's going to be a very live issue for a number of us then, as well as the sort of strategic issues about how the investment in the pension fund is or isn't supporting decarbonisation. Okay, so I think if that's all the interests that need to be declared, I'm just noticing that Basima has put a note in the chat saying, please keep your cameras off and mute your microphones unless you're speaking. I think that's just to preserve bandwidth, because I know a number of us have had issues with that in the past. So I'll turn one off as soon as I can once I've finished introducing the next part of the agenda. So I'm going to move on now to look at the tracking report on the plastic-free Birmingham inquiry, which this committee carried out and reported on in June of 2019. And I'm very pleased we've got John O'Shea and Darren Share with us today to talk about the progress against the recommendations of that report. So who's going to, John, are you going to kick off?
If that's okay, Chair, yes. The response to the report is in front of you. Don't plan to go through it line by line. But
No,
I would say
absolutely. It's been circulated with the papers, and I think because it's in summary format, isn't it? So I think you can assume that everyone's looked at it, is aware of the ratings against each recommendation.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say we're not where we would wish to be on this, but hopefully now we are moving out of the pandemic and return to something approaching normality. Then we can start to move some of these items forward. Whether any of them will be actually proved possible moving forward, I look particularly at the water fountains throughout the city. Whether that's going to be an attractive option in the future isn't clear, but happy to carry moving that forward. But we now have some key people in place within the council to support that move, and we're starting to see where the government might want to go in terms of improving recycling on plastics. As you may be aware, the Environment Bill passed Parliament last week is now law, but a lot of the stuff that they were talking about in terms of defining what is used for recycling and a common recycling collection across the country, that is still up for further legislation by the Secretary of State. So we are some way further forward. We don't know exactly what they have planned in terms of plastics and other items for recycling. If Darren wants to add anything. So I'm aware Darren has been at a conference this afternoon, so he may be dialing in on his phone.
Yeah,
Yes,
thanks, Councillor. Yeah, I am dialing. Sorry.
Welcome, Darren. Yeah, we weren't sure whether you were on the call, so yeah, if you please, yes, do chip in now.
Thank you. Yeah, apologies. I've been talking to a conference, and they want me to go back in because they're really interested about our mobile HRCs and how that is working and how that is improving or having any effect on our recycling. So yeah, there's real interest there. Yeah, it is unfortunate. We are struggling. We have struggled to make as much progress as we want to. I think it's been really interesting to say we've been working with our disposal contractor, and as you can see in the report, getting the ability to recycle different types of plastics is really significant, and moving from into that hard plastic recycling. We've been trialing that with Veolia. That is starting to be something that we can do, and therefore offer that to more residents and roll that out across all of the HRWC. So there is some more progress that we need to do. We are trying to push the market and the industry to be able to give us better recycling opportunities. And I think certainly with the Environment Bill over the next few years, the market is going to open up to us all to be able to recycle even more plastics than we're looking at the moment. If we've got a result for hard plastics, now the task is to try and find for plastic films. So that's what we're working with Veolia to try and do, and we have got some ideas and some campaigns ready to go to start to re-engage with residents to explain what can and what can't be recycled and what they can put in their bins. So all of that work is being undertaken. We're working very closely with RAP and Keep Britain Tidy at the moment to make sure that our messaging and our options is very clear to residents. And as Councillor O'Shea said, with the new Environment Bill, with the consistency of collections, hopefully will make some real impact of recycling plastics over the next few months and years.
Thanks very much, Darren. Yes, and thanks for coming out of the conference. Yes, and it's good that you're out there promoting the mobile household recycling centres as a way of getting things out of the waste stream and looking at how to recycle them. I mean, I said at the full council meeting, I think it was in September, that I have been disappointed really at the rate of progress against this quite significant inquiry that we did, and I can see that that there has been improvements since the last time this was reported on last year, but it does seem to be still quite slow. So one of my first questions, if I can abuse my chair position just briefly, where you talk about what Veolia is now doing to expand the range of plastics that are being recycling, where the rating has shifted from a 6, virtually nothing happening, to a 1. My question there is, how is that going to be communicated to residents? Because I think as a ward member, one of the most frequent questions I get from people who are interested in trying to live sustainably is what can they recycle? Where can they recycle? Where can they? That recommendation, and you talk about, and earlier in the tracking report, we talk about coffee pods, but it's things like Tetra Packs, plastic films, and all those sorts of things. And how is that going to be communicated? Is it just via the social media campaign that it's referred to, that's already finished, or is there going to be a concerted attempt to actually bring out some information leaflets for every household? So how are you going to do that, Darren?
So, it's a bit of both, really. So we've been working with Veolia. They've been trying to improve the information on their website. We've got some videos and some different messages that will help residents, but the people have got to get to that website. I totally understand that. At the household recycling centres now, we've got QR codes, so people, when they are looking at the waste, can see where that waste goes to. But again, you've got to be at the tip to do that. So this is the bit that we are looking at, and this is where Keep It Tidy. We've got a workshop in a couple of weeks, actually. They're reviewing all of our tagging, our information that we send out to residents, the current forms that we've got, the literature, and how we promote ourselves on our website, because people will come to Birmingham City Council's website before going to Veolia's. So all of that is looked at, because we really need to re-engage and be agile enough to respond to as the market changes. So hard plastics, a few months ago, we couldn't recycle. Now we've got an option. We need to be able to tell people that they need to take that to the HRC sites, and we will then be able to make sure they're in the right stream for recycling. And it's the same with coffee pods. So you're right, that message out needs to be very clear. We need to take that lead, and we are getting some massive support from Keep It Tidy to enable that, to make sure we got the right message and learn what other authorities are doing. We've got a visit in a couple of weeks from Manchester. They're coming down to again look at the way that we operate. They're coming to one of our HRC sites, plus they're going to look at one of our mobile HRC sites. And one thing that they're going to bring to the table is that they are going to share how they get their message off to their residents through small video clips. And we're going to basically use their ideas and work with them to develop them for in Birmingham.
Really pleased to hear that. Really pleased to hear that, Darren, because Manchester and Wales were two of the sort of case studies that we had for a system where the real circular economy system is working, and a real drive for zero waste. I mean, I suppose I'm still interested in what is the universal message that is going to go out to households. And you probably can't see this very well. I'm just holding up a leaflet from another council, which is just simple guidance about how to recycle plastics, bags, and wrappings. And it is absolutely, very, very simple. I'll get it scanned and send it to you. But I mean, if you're going out and seeking information from Manchester and other places, I think that's all to the good. And also, yes, let's have two-way learning. Let's have a chance to share the fantastic experience of the mobile household recycling centres, which I think we can all say are really fantastically popular with residents and a good thing. But the plastic recycling is down to to the range of plastics that can be recycled, and clear information to every household, and really pushing that so that residents, it becomes part of everyday life and not something that's an extra chore, and all the issues that we talked about in the evidence sessions. Okay, that's enough of a rant from me, but members of the committee, colleagues on the committee, do you have any questions for Darren and John, Councillor O'Shea, on this? We've got Councillor Chowdhury, followed by Councillor Quinnan, and then Councillor Leddy. So Zeka, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick one. you just mentioned you advertise on website and everywhere else. Do you webcast them in just English or different languages? Because Birmingham City, we are a multicultural city, and we got different background residents living in our city. And what measures do you take to promote that within those communities?
Darren?
Yeah, a couple of things there. One thing that we've been talking to Manchester. At Manchester do 13. They've got the video showing what to do in 13 different languages. We've traditionally, and we are still keen to try to do as much pictorial displays, making it very clear what you can and what you can't put in with either pictures or photos of what you can. We're looking at a bin sticker, for example, what will go onto a bin. So not just do you get a leaflet, which people might either lose or it falls off or hopefully recycled. By putting a sticker on the bin, every time you go to the bin, there will be some pictorial issues of what you can and what you can't put into it. So we are learning, but you're right. We've got to remember that we've got to get that message across to everybody, and as simply as we can. So we are looking at best practice, and that's what one of the things Manchester are definitely bringing to us of how they've communicated well to local residents.
Thanks, Darren. That sounds like a really positive example of best practice there, and the bin sticker, as you say, because leaflets it can get so easily lost. Hendrina, Councillor Quinnan, over to you.
Right. Thank you. Actually, my question is the same with Zake about the homes where English is not a first language, or where people don't speak English. So I just want to know what are you going to do in those homes, for example. If I go further, there are homes of HMOs, and there are homes that are for supported living. What it is actually, you can tell those homes, because when you walk on the street, you will find the recycling bin having the ticket that it will not be collected because it's contaminated. And residents aren't happy about those bins that are overflowing because the council will not collect them, to the extent that some HMO managers have decided that if the people have got additional needs and therefore they are unable to manage the recycling bin, the best thing is not to put those bins in the home, just leave them with a normal household, because the council will not collect them. So what can you say? How can you deal with that one? Especially in my ward, I've got many of the HMOs and supported living exempt accommodation, and these bins are left uncollected because they are contaminated. So would you agree with me in that it is better to remove those bins? Thank you.
Chair, if I could come back.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we can look to do, particularly with HMOs and indeed private rented sector more broadly, is we can when we bring in the registration scheme and licensing scheme for the private rented sector, there is space there to put some conditions in about how the landlords help their residents to manage waste. That, of course, won't be there for supported housing, because that is exempt from any sort of regulation by the local authority. That's a whole different side scandal. So there will be occasions, and there are occasions now, where we do withdraw recycling bins from sites where they are persistently not used properly, because it is very, very hard to get the education out there into a community that could be quite transient. and we'll certainly try the bin stickers. I like that because we can target that. We haven't got to do it to every bin. We can do it using the crews that are out there now, and they know where they get good and poor responses from residents on recycling, so they can apply the stickers to the bins, properties where they need a bit more advice on recycling. As I say, we're working with Keeping Tidies on ways of improving that, but there will be occasions where actually the best way for us, or rather the least worst way, is to remove the recycling provision. It's not a first choice, but the risk of contamination of a load, having to dispose of the entire truck, because we can't then recycle it, is too great. So there are occasions where we do that. We will need to tighten up how we work in terms of emptying contaminated recycling bins, because I think we recognise that it's very hard in most cases for people to sort out their recycling bin when it's packed full of rubbish. It's very hard for them to try and sort that out. And part of the decision that will be the introduction of the slab in the cab, which will allow us to tag bins, and they should then be tagged for the next refuse collection round to come along and clear them. So there is some work to be done over the next few months on improving that part of the service as well. So Dan wants to come in.
I'd just like to agree. I mean, we are working with the private rented sector as well to make sure that the contracts and the conditions of the lease has a better waste disposal options in there. So to remind the landlords and people involved in that they do have a responsibility of processing the waste correctly. So we are working with both the private sector, rented sector, and also the HMOs. So we are looking at that. But yeah, the slab in the cab it will enable us to get that contamination picked up, because ultimately we don't really want to take anybody's option to recycle out. But we do need people to be able to recycle correctly. So we'll give them the right information, we'll support them through that, and then we'll give them a few options before we have to take any drastic action like removing any recycling opportunity.
Thanks for that, Dan, because I do think removing the recycling option is very much the nuclear option, and I've had a couple of instances of that in some blocks of flats in my own ward. So I really, I understand why it has to be done if it's absolutely necessary, but I do think it has to be the last resort, because otherwise we're totally undermining the message that we're sending out to residents. And we've got to remember that our performance on recycling rates is very poor, and there's so much improvement that needs to happen there. Got Councillor Leddy and Councillor Johnson White, and just aware of time moving on. So if you both ask your questions, and then I'll ask Councillor O'Shea and Darren to respond to them both, and then to round off this tracking item. Councillor Leddy.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, there are a number of dates that are 15 months out of date in the Appendix 2, and I'm just wondering, are there definitive dates being given to this committee on when those recommendations are going to be actually implemented?
And Councillor Johnson White. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a very quick question about the mobile recycling units that are coming into the wards, which have been a fantastic success. What I'm finding is that from residents, is they're saying that they're not getting a great deal of pre-warning. And I think we only get a few days before we know that the units are coming into the wards. I wonder whether or not in future, whether or not, as other wards, etc. as well, whether or not we could have, 3 days in advance, 3 dates rather in advance, so that we could properly advertise these. And so we could put these out to residents. So the next 3 dates that the unit's going to be coming in the ward will be these dates, whether that's actually possible or not. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. So, John and Darren, are you able to answer questions from Mike that were about some definitive timescales, and then Julie's questions about more advanced warning for the mobile recycling centres?
I'll take the second question first. Thanks for the question, Councillor. Yes, we've been running as a trial to start with and working out how to make these things work most effectively. And part of that was we didn't want to give too much notice. We didn't want the news of the visit to get too broadly shared across the city. We don't want people driving the rubbish across Birmingham to take advantage of a particular MHRC. It's very much for a particular local area. But certainly recognise that the notice of a few days simply isn't good enough for councillors or for the public. So we should, within the next week or so, be centralising all our comms on the MHRC notifications, and you should get notification 3 weeks in advance of a visit. So that we don't want to put them out as a great lump. This was done by a couple of people in the past, so a great lump for the next 6 months. We'd rather they were notified individually, but we would aim to give you about 3 weeks notice of each visit to your ward, because I think that gives plenty of notice for people to get publicity going and get out there. And this is down to the feedback we've had from councillors and from residents, which has been universally positive about these centres. There is work to do to make it work better, but they've gone down really well. I know Darren has been in contact with me today. They've been fantastically well received at the conference he's at. I'm going to use the quote because I like it. The biggest thing to hit the industry in 10 years. So either the conference needs to get out more, or we've got something really good here. So that's really positive. Birmingham Innovation, that's actually leading the country on this. Councillor Leddy, dates we're struggling with, I have to admit. Some of this is dependent upon other people getting involved with this. We put some loose dates in, but what we'll do is we'll take this away and we'll try and give it some better revised dates for completion on these.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I think that question from Mike is very timely and well made, because I think there has been a considerable amount of frustration, certainly on my part, the rate of progress on some of this. And I understand what a challenge the whole COVID period has been for the waste and recycling service. We want to praise everyone who's kept it and maintained it so in such a stable way throughout this time of crisis. But I think that these issues about our plastic recycling and our general performance on recycling are just so critical. So, and that was really the meat of the inquiry that we did. But thanks for attending today and talking to us about that. Zeka, I can see. Were you trying to come in again, or was that a legacy hand, as they say?
A quick one, please. Just want to ask
quick,
John just a quick question regarding recycling mobile. The timing of is from 7 till 12, and how we going to cater the residents who are working? Have we got anything in pipeline to meet their needs? And also some elderly resident who can't get to the mobile vehicle. So how are we going to cater them?
Okay, can we have a very brief response on that? We will need to move on then.
Yes, well, outside the remit this item, but no, that's fine. We have looked at different hours. We've had some feedback from residents and from councillors that they quite like the early start of 7 a.m. We did look at moving it to an 8 a.m. start during the winter months, and that may yet happen because of safety reasons. But people have said that they actually like being able to take rubbish there before they go to work. So the 7 a.m. start has been brought in for that purpose, and it seems to be working. None of this is fixed in stone. If you find a way of making it work better, we're more than happy to do that. I would certainly accept that this is not a solution to the problem for people who cannot get their waste to the mobile HRCs, and we're aware of that. Of course, offering a broader service has significant financial implications. We do offer other services that would help people who can't transport waste. For example, we offer a chargeable bulky waste collection service from the person's property. You can also go to the private sector. If you need to dispose of white goods, then people like Currys and AO will take the goods away from you simply for the cost of the collection, which is about 20 quid. So there are options open to people to dispose of their waste safely and legally, and that's what we always encourage people to do. The MHRCs are a provision. There's no reason why neighbours can't help people bring stuff to them, and they do make use of them that way. And I know that the crews will quietly even help out too.
Thanks very much, Councillor Shane. I do acknowledge the challenge for people who are physically able to bring waste to the mobile centres, and yes, and if you haven't got a car or you're in some way prevented from doing that, the bulky waste collection from your house is a good option. And I think it's now 10 items, isn't it, for the £33 if you book it online. Okay, well, the next item that we've got is another one for Councillor O'Shea and Darren, which is to update us on the progression of the procurement process for waste disposal services. And as we've got a note that's been shared and distributed in the papers, which is really giving the stages of the procurement. I'm not sure how much people have got out of that, to be honest, but I understand that it doesn't. It's very much describing the technical aspects of the procurement bid, but just to reiterate that the concern of this committee, really, since we started tracking this procurement process, I think, which was in February 2020, just shortly before the COVID pandemic started, is really the compatibility of the course that we're pursuing through this procurement process with our climate action plan, which has the deadline of trying to achieve net zero carbon in Birmingham by 2030, or as near as possible thereafter, as a just transition allows. And I think we have this ongoing concern about the Tyseley incineration facility or energy from waste facility, and the level of carbon emissions that it's generating. And we have discussed these issues at length in the committee, but I just wondered whether Councillor O'Shea and Darren have got any further thoughts on that, or if there or anything is coming out of the competitive dialogue with potential bidders about any innovations that would help us to start to address that issue of carbon emissions.
Hi, Chair. We are unfortunately very limited in what we can say in what is still a public forum regarding an ongoing procurement. Do have Michelle Climers here as well as Darren. Any questions that you want to ask, I can't guarantee we can provide answers on them because this is still a live procurement exercise and will be for a little while longer. So I appreciate it's not a good answer to the question, but it is the answer I can give in a public forum.
That's fine. Well, and welcome to Michelle for joining us. Sorry, I hadn't greeted you before, Michelle. I mean, I think I'll wait to see if colleagues have got questions, but I just continue to have, as we've discussed it in other fora, and some of the working groups associated with the climate change task force, and I think this is continues to be an issue of concern, and it's clearly an issue of public concern because I'm continuing to get a lot of emails from campaigners who are concerned about why we're not moving to phasing out the incinerator entirely. And I think at on November the 6th at the climate action rally in Birmingham, which was that time to coincide with COP, again a number of speakers at the rallies at the beginning and the end of that event were expressing concern that while the council set a very good direction of travel with its climate change action plan, the waste disposal procurement tends to send an opposite message. So I'm just want to have that on the record again, so that people understand that we are trying as a scrutiny committee to actually raise those concerns through this route as well. Any questions?
No, Chair, sorry, I was going to say, Chair, I think you're absolutely right to raise those questions and keep us honest on that. I think that's a really important role of scrutiny. What I would say is that, as I said at every occasion, the contract we currently have to dispose of our waste ends in just over 2 years' time. That is a full stop. We can't extend it. We can't do any more other than reprocure. There is currently no working alternative for the volume of waste we have to dispose of, and one that we could deliver within that 2-year period. We couldn't even deliver it in the 4-year period when I took over this portfolio. I think we'll be realistically looking at a lead time of somewhere between 8 to 10 years to put an alternative method in place. We aren't yet clear as to what the regulatory direction will be taken by the government on this, and that will affect absolutely what we get into our waste stream, and that will therefore change how we dispose of waste. Key example, for example, would be that if they bring in a plastic or glass deposit scheme, which Scotland are supposed to be doing, but still haven't got around to doing it, and looks like they'll be delaying it for another 2 years themselves in Scotland. If they bring that in, then that will change radically what goes into our waste stream. People will stop putting plastic and glass into our waste stream, and we will not have that to dispose of at the quantities we have now. And if we were to look to move in the direction of, say, North Wales, where they are moving away from incineration and actually they're looking towards a bit more landfill, but landfill of the inert stuff that they can't otherwise recycle. So it's a tiny amount compared to what many authorities used to recycle, indeed what used to landfill, and indeed what some authorities still landfill. Bear in mind, we will be landfilling well under 10% of our waste this year, probably actually under 7%. But we are not in a position where we have that system of waste flowing into our disposal structure in the same way. They are further along, and they're also a different environment. We are a large urban environment, and especially North Wales isn't, and that does have an impact on what you collect and how you collect it. We know there are different collection sort of routines across the city depending on what part of Birmingham you're in. So there are problems dealing with a complex urban environment like ours that we still haven't got a resolution to. So as I always said, this for me is an interim solution, and we need to find a better way of doing it in the longer term.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor O'Shea. And I think we understand that, because you have conveyed that message very consistently through the period that we've been tracking this procurement process. But for me, absolutely, underlines the need to drive up our performance on recycling and actually look at the range of products that we're recycling, because compared to a lot of other authorities in the country, we are still offering quite a limited range of plastics in particular that can be recycled. We've seen the progress that's outlined in the tracking report, but I think we do have a distance to make up, and really the pushing on the zero waste strategy really seems to be absolutely key. But thanks for what you said today about the procurement process, and we will be continuing to take a live interest in that. So thanks very much, and thanks very much for Darren and Michelle for being here as well. So I'm not seeing any other questions from colleague committee members about that at the moment, so I'm going to move on and say thank you to Councillor O'Shea, Darren and Michelle for being with us today to talk about those items. I've just realised from the chat that I didn't pick up the comment that Basima had shared with me, that I didn't note apologies. We haven't received any apologies for this meeting, so sorry, I jumped over that in the agenda in my haste to get on to the body of the agenda, the main body of the agenda. So we've covered apologies. In a minute, we're going to move on to hear from Ellie Horwich-Smith, our new Assistant Director, who will be heading up the Council's dedicated climate change action or climate change team. But I'm just aware that Councillor Huxtable has got a time constraint today, needs to leave at 3 o'clock, and I wanted to just briefly touch on the Midland Metro suspension before Tim leaves, because I know that Tim, through his role in the Transport and Delivery Committee, has had some briefing on that earlier in the week. But I just wanted to say, in this public forum, that in October, this committee held a session on restoring confidence in public transport and how to encourage passengers back onto the various modes of public transport in the city. So it was very much with dismay and astonishment really that we all read the announcement that the metro was suspended on Saturday. So we've circulated to committee members the press notice that came from Transport for the West Midlands, and I'm aware that committee members may well have questions. In fact, Councillor Leddy's already submitted a number of very worthwhile questions about the engineering aspects of this meltdown and suspension of the Midland Metro. So we will try to get answers on that and look at holding a discussion about it in the form of an item at a subsequent committee meeting. I also chair the West Midland Combined Authority Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee, and we will be discussing the suspension on the 24th of November. So that's another route to where I can pass colleagues' questions on. But I do think that the loss of a whole mode of public transport for the city region is a really terrible development, and really doesn't fit well with the push that all the councils and the CA and Transport for the West Midlands are making to encourage people to use public transport and leave cars at home. So, Councillor Huxtable, I think if you're able to, are you able to say anything about the Transport Delivery Committee discussions, or where a recording of its deliberations is available online?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say that members were given a private briefing which can't be shared in the public domain for commercial confidentiality reasons, but a more concise version was discussed at the main board, which was held in public, and that is available on YouTube. So the whole meeting indeed is available on YouTube for people to go on and have a look. But just to let you know that members of the Transport Delivery Committee were asking very similar questions to those posed by Councillor Leddy in terms of the metro system, not just in terms of the current problems, but where do we go from here? How do we learn in terms of the future, given the extension of the metro network and the Mayor's vision for the metro systems for 2040, because we don't want this problem to ever reoccur. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Jim, for that the YouTube broadcast of the Transport Delivery Committee. So presumably that's available via the Combined Authorities website.
It is.
It'll be linked there. Yes, I think none of us want to see a repeat of this. And I think the most worrying thing at the moment is that we've been told that it's a suspension for at least a month. And there doesn't seem to be an end date. And as in the light of some of the engineering questions that Mike Leddy and some other colleagues in some of the other councils have raised, that very much seems to be an open question at the moment. So thanks very much. Thanks very much.
What I can add, of course, is that, as you know, that rail replacement or track replacement works are undergoing along Corporation Street at the moment. So by the time the Midland Metro is hopefully back working fully, those track replacements might be nearing completion or actually completed, so that when it does resume, it can resume along the whole route and not the current shortened route because of those rail replacement works.
Yeah, let's hope that that is the case, because I think that we need very much to be able to reassure people that the whole network is going to be available when the Midland Metro reopens. Okay, thanks very much, Tim, and I'm going to move on now, because I know that we've got Ellie and our guests from the West Midlands Pension Fund and waiting to present to us as well. So, but I didn't want that item to go unmentioned, because I do think it is again, sort of quite a shocking announcement. We understand the reasons why, and safety has to be paramount, but certainly not something that we'd expected to see, particularly after our discussions with Midland Metro at the last meeting. So to move on then, I'm really delighted that Ellie Horwich-Smith, our new Assistant Director for the Route to Zero Action Plan, is able to join us today. And the reason why we've asked Ellie is to come and talk to us today is to just get an understanding of what her immediate priorities are for implementing the action plan, what she sees as the challenges and opportunities and strengths and weaknesses of what we have in place at the moment, and maybe just to understand a bit about Ellie's own background and where she's come from before starting this job with Birmingham City Council. But we're all delighted that you're joining the council to head up the team, Ellie. So over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Yes, good afternoon, and obviously thank you very much for the opportunity to come and meet you all and talk about kind of my kind of emerging thinking, I guess, around the kind of Route to Zero team. I'm currently working on a day-a-week phased-in basis, whilst I conclude some of my existing commitments with kind of some of my other clients I've been working with to date. So I'll be starting proper in January, but I'm already starting to kind of formulate a kind of plan of what I want to be doing and what we should be focusing on come the new year, which I'll kind of share and summarise in just a few minutes. But just to kind of pick up on the suggestion that I just give a little bit of a background about myself. So I'm a Birmingham resident. I have been here for about 15 years now, and I would very much say that Birmingham's my adopted city and home. I'm previously have worked predominantly, well, entirely in the private sector to date, but working primarily with public sector organisations to support energy efficiency investment programmes, renewable energy, and more latterly energy infrastructure investments, particularly around district heating networks, of which I know that Birmingham already has a well-established network within the city centre. So particularly my areas of kind of experience are in housing. So I've worked extensively in energy efficiency and retrofit and heat decarbonisation for the domestic stock, but obviously a lot of that is applicable to the wider building stock as well. And as I say, particularly around kind of decarbonisation more generally of buildings and other infrastructure is a kind of area of strength that I kind of bring. But I would say I've been doing a lot of work around more general net zero activity and how we need to interlink different activities together to get the best output, both carbon related, but also economic, social, health, all the other wider benefits and opportunities that actually this kind of net zero transition presents. So kind of that's a little kind of potted history about me. In terms of the actual Route to Zero team, which has been given the kind of nod of approval to be able to be formed come the new year. Yes, I'll obviously be kind of starting properly in January to really start driving this forward. And obviously one of the key first priorities is getting that team into place. So we have some officers that will be joining me in that team from January, who have been working on the Route to Zero agenda to date, or have a kind of key contributory role to play in what we're doing going forward. But also we have a number of other opportunities that we're advertising or going to be advertising for towards the end of this year to kind of encourage that team to grow and expand its ability and resources. So that's obviously going to be a key priority, and that's something that I'm already working with colleagues on. In terms of one of the kind of next key things, it's a new team within the council. So obviously we need to make sure we establish the kind of processes that will ensure the projects that we focus on, the kind of portfolio of activities that we're already doing, but also those that we're bringing forward really are kind of fit for purpose. They are driving forward the carbon reduction that we need to see, and obviously the carbon reduction at scale that needs to come next. So this also does include a proposed kind of environmental and sustainability tool to look at appraising existing proposed council projects, which has been kind of discussed with officers within the council to date. I also want to kind of work to build the capacity and capability both within the council, but also with the wider community, both organisations of the public sector, individuals and businesses, to actually make sure we can deliver at the scale of activity that's required, and to share experience, to collaborate and co-design, and obviously to provide kind of mutual leadership as to what we can achieve around net zero. And one of the other kind of key things for me is obviously identifying and developing the next kind of what we call wave of projects. So there have been a number of projects that were identified in the first action plan, and they are a kind of wide-ranging projects covering all different sectors. But we need to kind of work forward and look at the next set of projects and initiatives that will really start to deliver the scale. And some of those may be projects that will directly lead to carbon emission savings. Others may be things that we need to enable the infrastructure, if you like, be that in capacity and capability to actually make net zero a reality for Birmingham, and obviously to support all of the residents and businesses and organisations that are based within. So that's just a kind of quick summary of kind of where I'll be kind of prioritising my focus, and obviously more information and kind of detail will be forthcoming when I've kind of fully started properly in January. But very happy to pick up any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Ellie. That was very, very clear and I think insightful contribution from you as you start this big job, which is going to be quite a big challenge, I think. I mean, we had a chat before the meeting, and you were talking about the scale of change that's needed in Birmingham, and that the limitations that are there with some of the the availability of public sector resources. So I wonder if you could talk to the committee a bit about what some of the plans that you have for engaging with the private sector to in a way to look at collaborations and levering in the resources that we need to make this massive change across the city.
Yes, of course. So I mean, I think we kind of know that there's obviously a limited capability and kind of set of funds available in the public sector. But I think what is also clear to me from the work that I've done in engaging with private sector investment through the Green Finance Institute is just the scale and appetite to invest by the private sector from all sorts of different angles in environmental, kind of social, kind of beneficially, kind of economic beneficial projects. I think the couple of things that we can start to look at. One is obviously what we can use by way of a local authority in terms of kind of powers and levers to support some of the projects that we might be kind of looking at going forward. But also I think we need to work with private sector partners, both delivery and also investment, to actually design and kind of co-design the projects that we want to seek investment in. And we are looking at a number of projects already that we see as being scalable going forward, looking at kind of the energy sprung retrofit model and a number of other activities as well. So I think what we need to do is make sure that the projects that we're bringing forward are investment ready. So that's in terms of what are the clear outcomes that they're achieving, what's the clear kind of structure, and I think it'll probably pick up on some of the things perhaps on the next agenda item. What are the things that investors want to see as being outputted from the investments that they make? And if we start to design that information within the projects that we're starting out with, then we'll obviously have a much better chance of being able to make them investment ready. And obviously I do think that there's a real opportunity here around improving the economic opportunity of businesses working in this sector, because not only do we need to know the projects and be able to secure the investment that we want to make, for example, in large scale retrofit across the city, be that private sector housing or social housing. We also need to build the capacity of the people who will have the skills and the supply chain to actually deliver upon those schemes as well. And that's another area where there could be an opportunity for leveraging in support from private finance to actually help businesses scale up their own activities or to divest into the green economy, retrain staff and build their own supply chains in this area. So I think there's a number of different dimensions that I'll be keen to explore.
Yes, you read my mind there, Ellie, because I was just thinking that we were going to have the discussion with our pension fund colleagues immediately after we've heard from you. So it's very useful to have that input from you about looking at investment-ready projects. But it also, when you're talking about the need for reskilling and looking at what the employment opportunities. I think that takes us on to the, to the issue of, of a just transition, and the fact that we need to be looking, that to ensure that the burden of the transition to zero carbon isn't falling disproportionately on the shoulders of those least able to take that burden. So we need to be looking at that what are the opportunities for employment and support for residents who need to look at changing the way that they heat their homes and aspects of their lifestyle. And obviously, having an in-house team doesn't mean that in-house team is doing all the work itself, but it's more how you inspire other parts of the council to work together and actually fully commit to this agenda. Because I think in the last couple of years since the council declared a climate emergency, we've seen a varying level of engagement across council services. And I think so on the transport portfolio, I think we've seen some very forward-looking, very bold policies which are looking to really address the fact that that a third of carbon emissions come from transport, and the council's really taking a leading role there. Whereas in other services, not least in waste and recycling, I think we are actually in danger of lagging behind. So just to understand what's your understanding of just transition, and how difficult do you think it's going to be to get the whole council to act as one council and to move corporately on this agenda?
I think they're both two very large, quite independent but interrelated topics, but I'll do my best to provide a kind of starting point, I guess. I guess just picking up on the kind of internal council engagement. Obviously, it's absolutely critical that we as a team provide the enabling capacity. Yes, absolutely, we'll not be able to deliver all of this work ourselves, and it's about embedding the principles of net zero into all the decisions we make and all the activity we do. It may not be that activity directly results in carbon emission savings, but it may be that it indirectly can support the agenda through, for example, procurement and the kind of what's called the scope 3 emissions, which is the emissions of the services and supplies that the council procures, for example, is a large area of ours and many other organisations' emissions. And obviously working on that will indirectly support emissions reductions across the wider city, as well as those organisations and wherever they operate more nationally. So I think that there are direct, indirect and probably enabling things that help make people understand or encourage people to understand the impact that their service has. And I think it's obviously very early days for me, and I'm yet to kind of meet with a lot of the kind of key teams within the council. But that's one of the first activities I want to be doing, is actually to be sitting down and kind of hearing from the different service areas, their concerns, the areas of opportunity that they've identified, what they'd be like to be doing more of, and actually trying to develop that positive communication and obviously support them in the activities that they've identified, because they are the experts in their sector. So I think it's probably that's going to be one of the first activities I do, is to support and understand where we're at as a council in terms of the detail, but also to start really filtering down into the ways and means that individual service areas have a role to play, and kind of designing that together, because it's not something that needs to be enforced upon people. It's something that obviously we all need to work on collaboratively, and therefore we need to be working collaboratively in the creation of those activities. So that kind of will be one of my first starting points. And just in terms of a just transition, well, I think we obviously need to ensure that everybody is able to benefit positively from the changes to net zero that we'll need to be able to deliver over the coming decade. For me, taking the example of the housing sector, that's about ensuring that individuals are ready and able to choose to support investment in net zero activities and have the different funding vehicles and investments available to them. There are a number of mechanisms that exist, there are a number of funding streams exist, and it can be very, very difficult and very, very complicated for people to understand how and where to start. The other challenge we have is to decarbonise our heating. It's not just a simple case of switching out a gas boiler and replacing that with a heat pump, because we need to ensure that the heat pump is affordable to run, and that requires significant levels of insulation within a property to make sure it is affordable to an individual. So we need to look at the individual requirements of each individual building, but be able to kind of package them together at scale so that we can drive down the cost of the works, but also bring in different funding streams and investment opportunities to be able to match the individual and the individual's own kind of capacity to pay or not to those funding vehicles, so that everybody can accept and take it up. But the support's there to enable them to support that, and that may include charges on the property, whereby it's the household, whoever lives in that house in the future, that contributes to the savings through their energy bills, or, as I say, through grant funding. So I think it is complex. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to make homes, particularly, but buildings generally, ready for a kind of renewable and net zero technology. I think there are a number of examples out there that we can draw upon, and we're already starting to engage in, as I mentioned, Energy Strong being one of them, that will help support that process. And obviously, if we inform and have a clear understanding of the efficiency of our own stock, as well as that of the wider city, we can start to kind of amalgamate projects at scale and then work with the individual homeowner, which will require lots of support and advice, to actually implement that and bring the funding that they need to support it. So I hope that helps, just to give a flavour to start with.
No, that's very, very helpful. I'm aware I asked you two very massive questions there, so I thought you did a very good job of answering both of those very concisely. Can I just ask if there's questions from other members of the committee? Any colleagues wanting to ask Ellie a question at this stage? Obviously, I think she's somebody that we're likely to be seeing quite a lot of over the next few years. Okay, at the moment, I'm not seeing any hands raised in the Teams function, so I'm going to say thanks very much to Ellie for that very thoughtful and very comprehensive introduction to both her, as a person, and also her overview of what's going to be involved in implementing this action plan and actually driving forward the journey towards net zero carbon. And obviously, we know that we're having an update report on the Route to Zero action plan at January for council, so we'll be getting a stock take on progress to date. And I personally am very interested in what Ellie's just shared with us about the assessment tool for sustainability and carbon reduction. I think that's what you referred to, Ellie, and I think that is an important development, because we need to be looking at every aspect of the council's activity and ensuring that it's consistent with the targets that have been set in that action plan. But for today, thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time to join us, and we look forward to an ongoing dialogue with you on this scrutiny committee.
Thank you, Chair.
And as Ellie's just said in her remarks, I think that does allow us to segue quite neatly onto a final item for discussion today at this meeting, which is the West Midlands Pension Fund and issue of disinvestment from fossil fuels. So I'm delighted that we've got Rachel Brothwood, Director of Pensions, and Simon Taylor, Assistant Director of Pensions from the Pension Fund, joining us today. Extremely grateful to you both for taking the time to come and talk to us about this. And there's really, again, the impetus for this item is that the Birmingham City Council's Route to Zero task force has talked about how pension fund investments are being used across the West Midlands a number of times, and it's delegated to this scrutiny committee the task of engaging with yourselves as the pension fund to talk about the pension fund's plan for decarbonisation, but also the Birmingham City Council passed in 2017, on the initiative of two Liberal Democrat councillors, a disinvestment or a divestment motion, asking for progress towards moving completely out of investment in fossil fuels through the pension fund. So that motion was included in the papers for the committee meeting. But that's partly to remind all of us as Birmingham City councillors that we've been talking about this issue for a number of years, and indeed before the council declared a climate emergency. So that's the reason that we wanted to invite you to come and talk to us today. Your presentation has been circulated with the papers, but it would be great if you could now show us the presentation and talk us through the key points. So over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Clements, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have the opportunity to come and talk to you. So bear with me a minute while we just get the presentation up on the screen. I hope you can all see that okay. And yes, thank you. So my name is Rachel Brothwood. I'm Director of Pensions at the fund, and just as the chair has introduced, we're here today to talk to you about what the pension fund's response to climate change is, and specifically share with you what we have done and how we've evolved since the Birmingham City Council motion was passed in 2017. So in particular, we'd note the concerns raised around the risks that climate change poses to the value of the fund's invested assets. And we want to share with you a little bit about what we've been doing to analyse that risk, how we have developed, how we allocate capital, and more broadly, our approach to advocacy and influence and matters that have been touched on already by this committee this afternoon. So we will leave time for some Q&A at the end as well, but bear with us while we just walk through a little bit of background. So I was pleased to hear at the start of the meeting that a number of you who are here today do already have some knowledge and interaction with the pension fund through through membership or family and friends. We are and we do serve the local authorities and public sector workers across the West Midlands. Our primary purpose is to perform the role of administering authority on behalf of all the local authorities and employers in the West Midlands region. We collect contributions and we use those contributions to invest and pay pension benefits to members over the long term. And many of our members are joining us today will be paying pension benefits to them into the next over the next 80 to 100 years. So it really is a long-term task that we have. In terms of our service delivery, so it has evolved as public service delivery has evolved, and the employers that we work with across the region we'll talk to a little bit as well. As an organisation, and as shown on the base of this slide in front of you, we do aim for high standards across all areas that we work, and this is demonstrated through the accreditations that we aspire to and that we achieve. And again, we'll touch on the specific ones which relate to our investment activity as we go through this afternoon. In terms of broader context, very quickly, just talk to the stats on this page. So we are part of the national local government pension scheme. Within England and Wales, we're one of 87 funds, and the scheme as a whole, and the West Midlands in particular, has grown significantly in recent years. I'll apologise now for the typo in terms of the number of members on this slide. We do have, and we did it at March, have 343, just over 343,000 members in our fund, and we work with 764 at that date employers across the region. And as you can see, there's a wide range of contractors, education sector, as well as the local authority region. Just quickly on governance, as I said, the role of administering authority rests with the City of Wolverhampton Council, and the day-to-day is delegated to the Pensions Committee, on which Birmingham City Council has a representation through Councillor Paul Davies, who has recently joined our committee. In terms of the day-to-day, so the Pensions Committee meets quarterly, and we share broadly, not just with the committee members, but also with different groups across the region. So we meet with different officer groups and different member groups, as well as our local pensions board, which is made up of a mix of member and employer representatives. On policy and framework, and moving particularly to investment and responsible investment, we adopt a beliefs-based approach and use this very much to inform our investment strategy and drive our approach to climate stewardship, taking a very active approach as a shareholder, including how we disclose some of our activities and progress. just wanted to draw your attention to one of the statements we made in our 2021 climate change strategy and framework. We now make a more explicit link to our climate strategy within the context of our wider corporate objectives, which are to have global influence, to use the scale of the fund to influence globally, but also very much rooted in our sole purpose, which is to deliver for local people. But although this came in 2021 in terms of a refreshed climate change and strategy, this isn't a new concept. And just to illustrate on this slide here, I wanted to share with you that in terms of being an active party and very much engaged in corporate activity, this is something the fund has been doing for a number of times. So we were founder of the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum. We've been signatory to the UNPRI since 2011. We are signed up to the UK Stewardship Code and recently were re-accredited to that code as signatory in 2021 by the Financial Reporting Council. And we were one of the first funds to align our climate reporting in line with the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And this was recognised by the Environmental Audit Committee in 2017. In 2019, we released our first climate strategy and framework and took this out of a broader responsible investment policy, recognising the importance and the significance of climate change on the work we do, not just with our investment assets, but also in terms of the managing the risks that we face and thinking more about how we allocate capital. So there are a range of tangible, measurable outcomes which we could share with you to demonstrate our progress over the last few years. And I've tried on this slide just to summarise a few which I think are particularly pertinent to the 4 points raised within the motion passed by full council in 2017. So the bullets at the top demonstrate how we've changed our allocation of capital. They measure using our climate risk metrics, which we've been measuring and disclosing for the last couple of years. And they demonstrate that we have reduced the portfolio's carbon exposure and risk, and we have increased investment in opportunities which ultimately will support the transition to net zero. Our leadership in this space has been recognised, so we were chosen as a case study by the Accounting for Stewardship Asset Owners Network. We released our annual stewardship report in April this year, and we're really pleased to be part of the initial wave of first signatories to the new stewardship code. We have reviewed early our 4-year climate framework that we set in 2019, just recognising the pace of change, policy development and need for increase in pace of action by all parties. And most recently, having worked with the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, the IGCC, to develop the Paris Aligned Investment Initiative and the Net Zero Asset Framework. We've then used that framework to inform our own strategy development, and we're pleased to make our commitment as a net zero asset owner earlier this month. So we believe that we have sort of delivered significantly more and a much greater contribution really to some of the real world outcomes that we see. Apologies, I might have gone on too far. Yeah, sorry. So we believe some of the actions we've taken, again, just commenting briefly on the call for divestment, in terms of the things that we all now recognise matter, which is real world action at pace and real economic outcomes, that we believe that the approach that we are taking to align the portfolio to net zero will achieve much more than stock by stock divestment. We take our active ownership very seriously, engage on issues and themes which are important to our stakeholders, and we collaborate, as your previous speaker has talked about, to leverage the scale that we have and the outcomes that we can achieve. So climate change is one of our dedicated engagement themes, and we see finance emissions, focusing on financed emissions and engaging with particular sectors such as the banking sector being areas where we can make material progress in incentivising change at scale. There's more information in the appendix. We don't have time to necessarily go through it this afternoon, but there's a couple of initiatives just to draw to your attention. So we're part of the Climate Action 100+, which is a global initiative campaigning by and behalf of asset owners to encourage companies to make commitments for emission reductions, improve climate governance, financial disclosures, and it's not just the commitments, it's also working to benchmark and measure those outcomes, and these are focused on the largest emitters and assessment against a criteria of 10 specific indicators. We're also one of the founders for the Transition Pathway Initiative, and our investment company RGPS Central is taking this forward to its next phase now, as this looks to cover an increased range of companies, assess company management performance and carbon performance to inform investment strategy. And the one thing that, again, just as an example of how this is driving real scalable change across institutional investors, is that this initiative is now being used to inform the development of investment indices to make low carbon investment strategies and net zero strategies more accessible to a wider range of institutional investors. So we do believe, as I said very briefly, we have an opportunity. There are opportunities, and we do have a role in allocating capital to realise opportunities and meet the changes needed to transition and deliver on our climate ambition, which is aligned to many others. We can talk to a number of examples of where we're doing this in real life, and on the screen you'll just see there's a range of industries where this is really happening through the money that we invest through our portfolio. In terms of the 2021 framework, and just finally for me, it's very much been a review that's looked at the broader actions that we can undertake. Ambition has to be backed up by action, and climate risk, as referred to in the earlier presentation, actually, it's not isolated to just the environmental factors. There are also knock-on implications for social factors and also biodiversity. So we are also campaigning for companies to consider just transition, looking at the need to evolve skills and employment opportunities, as well as influencing much more on the demand side. In summary, I'd say a coordinated and collaborative approach is needed by all to ensure long-term sustainability. And I'm going to hand over to Simon now, who's going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing in engaging the employer base that we have here in the West Midlands.
Thanks, Rachel, and good afternoon all. Yeah, so as Rachel said, I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking you through our engagement with our employers. And when it comes to engaging with them on climate risk, we've really been extending this engagement since 2019 in earnest. The majority of this engagement has been in the context of employer covenant. And by that, I mean an employer's ability to meet their liabilities in the fund, both now and in the future. And it won't come as any surprise to all of you, I'm sure, that climate-related issues and headlines as such have become far more prevalent in recent time. Some of those are on this slide, and it very much resonates across the West Midlands region. And this is why we've undertaken extensive engagement to both raise the awareness of these risks, but also to help our employers understand how they might go about mitigating some of those risks. If I can move forward, please, Rachel. Thank you. I think just go back one, sorry. Yeah, sorry, just to give you a flavour of some of the climate-related risks across the spectrum. These are one of our heat maps which we've developed to illustrate the widespread of risks in different sectors of our employer base. Without delving into too much detail, but by way of example, it's probably quite prominent and clear to you that there are a number of physical risks which are prevalent across all sectors, with the potential for flooding being one that stands out in particular. Physical risks, of course, are often better understood by our employers, as they do to a certain extent appear more tangible. However, equally, there are also transition risks, i.e. those associated with moving to a less polluting or greener economy. And in some cases, these can be quite considerable across sectors. And it is with this spectrum of risks in mind that we continue to engage with our employers. And it's important to note that in many cases where there is a risk, there could also be a consequential opportunity. Again, if I can move forward, please. So in that vein, there are a number of questions that employers could challenge themselves on in terms of strengthening their climate governance. And these are the issues that we are seeking to reinforce in order that our employers might improve their covenant over time. In the interest of time, I'm not going to run through each of these questions you see on this slide, but rather just to highlight that they are largely based around awareness and action, but also with different time horizons, which you'll see on that slide. Some are more achievable in the short term, or might even be in place for that matter, such as overall awareness or integration into management policy. And then others require sort of a more longer term adjustment or action, such as developing regional reporting or engaging and influencing other stakeholders.
Can I just interject? Can I just interject very briefly? I think that slide, I know you didn't want to read out all the questions, but I think that way of thinking really is what that every organisation needs to be doing to assess its whole the whole gamut of its activities. And I think when Ellie Horwich-Smith was talking about an assessment tool, I think she's referring to some work in the council which is moving in this direction. So I mean, I was delighted to see this. I think it's really a really positive thing. Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely, thank you, Chair, and that's really helpful to know. And it's fair to say that we're engaging across 800 employers on this, and there's varying degrees of awareness and proactivity on this. But yeah, I completely agree that this is a sort of a toolkit to assess where employers are is very, very important. And then if that leads me nicely on to sort of the work we've been undertaking in this space. And as I alluded to earlier, that the primary focus of our engagement to date has largely been around awareness, but now we're moving towards introducing opportunities and building towards action where possible. And this has been achieved to date through a series of engagement mediums, which are on the slide, things such as webinars and surveys and questionnaires. And really what we're trying to do here is helping our employers to relate to their own risks or their own specific sectoral risks, which bring it to life. And we very much intend to maintain this trajectory that we've embarked upon with planned future engagement as part of the next valuation with all our employers, and also for the potential for climate-related covenant risk to be reflected potentially in some of the contribution outcomes at the next valuation, which of course is very important. And therefore, just to close, I suppose just as the climate risk is becoming increasingly topical and influential on the investment side, as Rachel touched upon, so too is it on the funding and covenant side. And we believe as a fund we are early movers on this front in the context of the LGPS and potentially the broader pensions industry. But there is clearly a significant road ahead, and that's where we're focusing our engagement with our employers on going forward.
Thank you, Simon. So just to quickly summarise, Chair, if I may, before we open into Q&A, as a pension fund, I mean, we do take climate risk, the impact of climate risk incredibly seriously, and have done an awful lot to think about how we allocate capital to protect against risks and also opportunities. Within it, we're also looking at our own operational functions. We're looking at suppliers, services, value chain, in exactly the same way as the previous speaker, Ellie spoke about. So really hope this has been a useful addition to the committee's agenda this afternoon. And as I say, happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, both. I think that was a very clear and comprehensive presentation from you both, Rachel and Simon. I'm going to open it up to questions from the colleague councillors on the committee, and I've obviously got a number of questions myself, so I'll just wait to see if anyone wants to take the plunge first of all. Okay, everyone's being a bit shy at the moment, so I'll take the plunge then. And I've got a couple of questions actually which relate to things that are in the appendix, but just to say generally, I think what you've presented is very shows a really positive direction of travel, and the steps that have been taken, and particularly what you just talked about in terms of the engagement with employers. But I suppose for me, there's a slide early on in the presentation where I think you said, Rachel, that the exposure to fossil fuel reserves has been reduced by 40%. So my question is, what is the existing, but what does that leave in terms of the ongoing exposure to fossil fuel reserves? Because if we go back to the wording of the council motion, it was really calling on the fund to disinvest entirely from fossil fuels. And obviously, you have a view about whether or not that's practical or realistic at the moment, but a lot of the messages coming out from the IPCC and other expert bodies are really that if we're genuinely trying to achieve less than 2% climate warming or 1.5% climate warming, any fossil fuels that are in the ground should be left in the ground. And we all saw the the compromise that was made at the end of the Glasgow conference, where it moved from phasing out to phasing down coal. So clearly everyone's struggling with this. But I suppose what is the level of exposure to fossil fuel reserves at the moment, and what are your targets for genuinely getting to net zero carbon? Because that's why I mentioned the appendix, because I think it's on slide 18 of the appendix. You've got a target of reducing by 50% by 2030, and at the moment that doesn't sit well with Birmingham City Council's climate action plan, which sets a target of 2030 for reaching net zero carbon, or as soon as possible thereafter, as just transition allows. So we're obviously, we hedge to a certain extent, but we've set 2030, and the West Midlands Combined Authority has set 2041. So I just want to understand how all of this fits together. And I suppose my overall question is what you're doing ambitious enough?
No, that's fine. If I can work through those. So I think the first thing to note is that one of the biggest challenges that the whole industry has is measuring exposure to carbon risk. So what we committed to do in 2019 was to establish a set of metrics which we could consistently measure and monitor to track our own performance. The metrics or the references that are often made to fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel investments are, in our view, a little bit misleading and potentially unhelpful, because we can't look at it goes wider than the oil and gas sector. There's multiple sectors need to engage to actually deliver on the global ambition for net zero. So we can't focus on a single company or a single sector. What we can do is track over time, and we can track a number of different things. No single metric really gives a good indication. One of the slides in the appendix talks to different industries and different sectors moving at different paces. And as part of our engagement strategy, there have been outcomes and successes which have increased in terms of their intensity through the increase in disclosure and the increase in measurement that's been able to be carried out through independent research. So one of the things we particularly like about the Climate Action 100 initiative is it is evidence-based and research-backed. At the minute, we still very much feel that engagement, even with the largest emitting companies that are not transitioning at the pace that we would like to transition, is still the right course of action. If we were to divest, we would lose the opportunity to engage, and there is no guarantee that anybody else would pick this up. And I'm sure these are arguments that you'll have heard before. But we have, as you rightly pointed out, we have at a sort of wider portfolio level set ourselves a target which is to reduce our own emissions by 50% by 2030. We've done that based on what we can see at the minute as credible pathways. And one of the findings from the Paris Aligned Investment Initiative and Net Zero Investor Framework is unfortunately there are no credible pathways for investors at the minute that lead cleanly to net zero. So we need to continue to work on the measurement, the definitions is important, and on the companies who engage and ultimately need to set the strategy and involve and transition their own businesses before that filters through to us as investors. So that isn't, I think what we have to be very careful about is there are, going back and slightly technically a little bit to the different types of emissions. It's different to have an ambition for an own organisation where you know there are things that you can do, but investment for the pension funds sits within our value chain, so is effectively scope 3, and we need to manage that transition over time, monitoring the progress that the underlying companies are making, and gradually transition the investment strategies of the fund to ensure that we don't result in any unhelpful financial consequences and damage the long-term objective of the fund, which is to ensure we have enough money to pay pensions over the long term. So sorry, that's quite a long answer, and I know it doesn't give the sort of specific number, but what I can assure you on is that we are continuing to work with the industry ahead of any regulation that applies to the LGPS to ask the difficult questions and to set ourselves targets, even though we don't have a clear idea around how we'll achieve them yet.
No, that's fine, Rachel, because it's clearly, you know, a very complex set of issues, and you could tell from the number of declarations of interest at the beginning that we're all, you know, we all have, you know, a stake in that the fund is, you know, financially healthy and will be able to, you know, support the beneficiaries, you know, on the, you know, over the future decades. And so I am very aware, you know, as a former local government worker myself, that, you know, a large number of, you know, proportion of, you know, local government pensioners, you know, were, you know, in very low paid occupations, you know, and you know, you've got to, you know, preserve, you know, their financial security going into the future. But I suppose, you know, again, as a complete layperson, probably somebody who hasn't spent enough time looking at, you know, pensions, what I just understood from what you said, that there is no route, you know, to zero at the moment from the point of view of investors to net zero carbon. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, one of the conclusions of the net zero investor framework. So this is one of the partners with the Race to Zero campaign. So this was a global initiative that looked at whether for asset owners there was a pathway, and there isn't any credible pathway that currently exists. So yes, that's not to say that we're not working with others to establish a transition pathway, but it's harder to set than it is, say, an emissions target on your own organisation, which may be looking at a building and heating and transport. So, sorry, I don't want to hog the time, but in effect, you're saying to us at the moment it's impossible to set a year, you know, a deadline of a specific year by which you would be net zero carbon, and you're saying that that's a problem of the whole sector. I mean, I think I'll have to go away and think about that, because not sure that I really have quite grasped, you know, that all of that, but thank you for spelling that out. Yeah, no, that's fine. And there's lots of, I mean, just to be clear, there's lots of modelling and ways that it could be manufactured, but ultimately we're still looking, and again going back to the how do we play our role in ensuring real economic outcomes, positive economic outcomes, and it is we believe continuing to advocate for organisations to develop their own climate policies, approach, measure, disclose, and then we will be more informed in terms of understanding what we can achieve from an investment perspective.
Okay, well, that's helpful. I mean, I suppose just for me personally, that just is quite a worrying thing to hear, and just to know that you've got, you know, the 18 billion pound, you know, asset base, which one would think would be quite a powerful, influencing tool. And clearly you've outlined how you are advocating with different industrial sectors and so on. Just the final question from me, I was very interested on slide 9, where you were talking about the investment in the sectors that are responding to the challenges of climate change. And I wondered how much of that is actually local investment that is actually taking place in the West Midlands, because again, one of the things that Ellie touched on briefly was the fact that we need to look at how we skill up the workforce, and look at that what we're going to need to do to retrofit and look at all sorts of different new green technologies in the region. So I suppose it will be just interesting to hear more about how much of that is actually going to have an impact in the region immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem. So you're right. We are a global investor, but in a number of areas we do have a focus on the local area and on the region. So just to give a bit of flavour for the different sort of sectors we talk to. So we have companies in the portfolio who are involved in delivering some of the consulting work, again, to support organisations' development strategy. There are those that are developing parts, buildings in particular. So we do have an overweight of our direct property in the West Midlands regions, and it came up earlier around lease arrangements on private rented. We in a similar way with our commercial property have arrangements with those tenants around improving reporting and on the tenant sort of side of the behaviour as well. And we're also looking at our portfolio and thinking around how we can evolve, either through investing in the buildings that we own, or looking at strategies to improve the efficiency of the buildings, which in some cases may be a complete rebuild, but we do look at that on an asset by asset basis. Just on the logistics, is probably a good one, which is in the local area, which is this again, it's a developing area of vertical farming. So looking at how some perishable items are produced locally rather than transporting them. And we also have examples where we've worked with organisations to on regeneration, so particularly looking at buildings in city centres. We've got examples on one across the region where we've worked to regenerate what were unused building spaces into accommodation for the local area and city centres, which is bringing people into the region and helping being part of that city centre regeneration.
I'm just aware that I don't want to use up all the time. Just start to ask committee members again if anyone's got any questions. Please don't hesitate, because we've got Rachel and Simon with us here to answer the questions and help us get our heads around this. I mean, one question I have, and it's come up several times at the Council's Climate Change Task Force, is why aren't the Council and other big public sector bodies just setting up big social enterprises on retraining for green technology skills, but also for retrofitting housing stock, including private sector housing stock. And if someone came forward, had a big plan or a big idea of that nature, would they be dealing with an intermediary, with a financing body that would then relate to you, or how would you actually engage with businesses in the region?
So we have a variety of ways in which we do engage, but typically an intermediary of some form is required. I think what's been very helpful, and Ali mentioned it, the idea of ideas and projects being investment ready, and there being a growing understanding of what institutional investors in particular need to satisfy their sort of criteria, and ourselves included. So what makes an investable proposition? The dialogue on that has increased substantially in the last couple of years, and is really positive. But yes, we do, for the avoidance of doubt, we do have our eye on opportunities in the region.
Well, it's obviously very good to hear that, because I think we're just painfully aware in Birmingham that the scale of the challenge that we've set ourselves through the Climate Change Action Plan just simply can't be achieved but from the resources that are available in the public sector, and it's going to have to be a partnership and leveraging in money from elsewhere and from private sector companies. Well, at the moment, I can't see any other questions from colleagues at the moment. I'm aware that it's quite this is quite a sort of it's a big area to get your head around, and it's quite complex, isn't it? But I think that shows, but the amount of investment involved, I think, shows the importance for all of us, and the potential to influence what large sectors of the economy are doing to contribute to net zero carbon. So I'm very grateful to have this update from you. And if there aren't any more questions on that, I'd like to thank you both very much for a very clear and comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so that takes us on to our just item to discuss the our future work programme for the next few months. That's been circulated, and you can see we've got a few gaps for future meetings. In December, we'll be having an update on the highways PFI, and I've also, I think, asked for Basima to invite Sylvia Broadley to come and talk about the electric vehicle charging strategy, because that seems to be something that we're making rapid progress, but it would be interesting to get her overview on the back of the cabinet report that went through last week. And I think we may well want to come back to the metro issues, but just like to open it up now for any suggestions from colleagues about items that they'd like to see in future meetings. I can see Mike. Yeah, Mike. Fire away.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the heating across the road from Margaret Street in the BMI is absolutely appalling. And I'm wondering why we're not using the committee rooms within Margaret Street for meetings. Because Margaret Street, I'm going to be truthful, because the chief exec has got her office there. The heating throughout the whole of Margaret Street is quite good. But then to farm councillors out into the BMI, which is like a refrigerator, is, I think, unacceptable. And we should be using the committee rooms. I don't know whether any of the officers present would like to make a comment on that.
Thanks, Mike. Obviously, that's not strictly a question about the work programme, but I'm quite interested in that, because I've been copied into some correspondence between the chair of the Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee and the chief exec about the conditions in the BMI. I mean, appears to be a question about the heating not working and it being very cold, which is clearly not a good thing now. But I've also got a general concern about the level of ventilation in the main hall of the Birmingham Midland Institute, and I think the quality of the broadband, the ability to hold meetings where people are dialing in through Teams seems to be a bit limited as well. So I think Kerry raised her hand. So Kerry, do you want to make some comments about that?
Thanks, Chair. I've just popped a little note into the chat, but just to say that the new head of Democratic Services has raised this issue following it being picked up with him, as you say, via the chair of the Health and Scrutiny Committee with the BMI, and they are looking at ways in which they can improve the heating in the rooms. As I understand it, I think the rooms in Margaret Street, the committee rooms, they're not quite big enough for the size of our committees, and to allow some element of social distancing within that, combined with web streaming capability, as you say. But I do know that it is something which is being considered, because as Councillor Leddy rightly points out, it is very, very cold over there.
Mike,
if I may, Chair.
Yeah, go on, yeah.
If I may, I was at an event in committee room, I think it's B, the big one. That'll hold 30 people. Now, there's not many committees where officers and members present are more than 30. And therefore, I think, we should look at it at least.
Chair, I'm happy to pick this up offline. I think there are potentially other issues which would cause complications in terms of availability of the rooms, with other meetings already scheduled, as Councillor Leddy says. The senior officers and cabinet members also have office space in Margaret Street. I suspect that will impact on room availability, and also making sure that we've got the infrastructure within the rooms for web streaming as well. So I'll take it offline and come back to you if I may.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. That's helpful. I mean, I'd had some of the same thoughts as Mike, because I mean, when I worked for the council, I worked in Louisa Ryland House at that point, and the rooms in Margaret Street were regularly used for quite large meetings. But I mean, that was before the time when there was any consideration of accessibility for linking up to Teams and the IT infrastructure, and particularly broadband. But if you could keep update Mike about that, or perhaps the whole committee, that would be really helpful, Kerry. Zeka, your hand's up.
Sorry, just Chair, is it possible in one of our meetings if you could call Kier, because the repair work they're doing, it's not up to standard, to be quite honest with you, and if they could come and answer us.
Absolutely, Zeka, and I think Basima will correct me if I'm wrong, but we're getting a briefing.
Yes, Chair. Can you hear me? Sorry.
You're a bit faint, but I can hear you. Yes, you just confirmed that.
Yeah, so Dom and Kevin are due to attend December's meeting as a report going to Cabinet on the PFI contract, and they will be able to update us, and then we'll be able to schedule something in with Kia accordingly. So
Yeah, because to be quite honest with you, I'm getting a lot of complaints, and I'm sure some other councillors from other wards that the work they carry out is not up to standard, and you know, I'm getting a lot of stick from my resident within my ward.
I'll feed that back then as part of their update in December.
Yes, because the update will be mainly about how the negotiations are going for the permanent replacement of the PFI contractor, because obviously Kia at the moment are working on a temporary 1-year contract. I think it is. We've all been briefed on that, but I'm sure Dom and Kevin, as we know, are always happy to pick up other questions from councillors, and I sympathise with you, Zaki, because I'm getting the same sort of complaints. Although there has been, obviously, there is an investment programme. So I have actually in my ward had some good news recently about some major resurfacing works that are going to be done on some of the worst roads that are in an absolutely shocking state at the moment. But yes, that will be opportunity to talk about that in December.
Yeah, I'm experienced with they were supposed to, do one of my road within my ward, and to be quite honest with you, they closed the road for 3 days, and all they done is just a little 2 patches, and they left the whole road in same state, terrible state, and I had residents going my head in, to be quite honest with you. They said we are wasting, taxpayers' money, and why did they close the road for 3 days and they didn't deliver?
Yes, I'm sure things like that will sound very familiar to a number of us as local members. Are there any other queries or requests about the work programme? Not seeing any at the moment, so I'll move on. And the last thing I have to do formally is ask if there are any items of urgent business that anyone wants to raise. Again, not seeing any raised hands there. We've already touched on the Midland Metro situation, and we will continue to chase up information from that and return to that. I anticipate in the next meeting. But if colleagues have got any questions that they want us to relay to Transport for the West Midlands, please forward them to Basima. And can I just check for Basima, as this is an informal meeting, do I need to seek the consent to act between meetings, or is that irrelevant because it's an informal meeting?
Yeah, it's irrelevant because it's an informal
meeting. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of today's meeting. So I thank everyone for their participation and their interest in some of those complex issues that we've discussed today. And have a great evening. Enjoy the rest of the day while the mild weather lasts, and see you in December. And could I just ask Basima and Kerry to just stay on the call briefly at the after we've ended the live stream. And thanks everyone else for their attendance, and thanks to all our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.